And importantly, 3/4 of people said the suffering they see in the world has not caused them to abandon their belief in God.
So faith often remains intact. How do people manage that?
A key factor seems to be finding meaning. Studies consistently show that individuals who can find some kind of coherent framework for their suffering, often through their religious beliefs, they cope much better. It's a psychological concept called meaning making.
Meaning making.
Yeah. And research from the American Psychological Association, it really highlights how your specific beliefs about God and suffering, your theodicy, the framework you use,
Right, I see, right.
how that actually correlates with your mental well-being. For instance, if you see God as passive or unable to control suffering, that view is linked with higher levels of depression and anxiety. But conversely, believing in a God who actually suffers with humanity, that's associated with lower PTSD and spiritual distress. They saw this particularly in studies with U.S. military veterans.
Wow, that's specific.
It is. It really shows how our beliefs aren't just abstract ideas. They shape our resilience, our capacity to endure.
It's incredible the practical impact of these beliefs.
Yeah.
So beyond just assigning blame or finding ways to cope, what about a positive purpose? Do people see any good coming out of suffering?
Yes, many do. Despite the pain, there's often a sense of broader purpose. A significant chunk, 61% of U.S. adults, think suffering exists partly to provide an opportunity for people to come out stronger.
Personal growth through adversity.
Exactly. And there's also this widespread belief, 68% of Americans feel this way, that everything in life happens for a reason. That provides a sense of ultimate purpose or destiny, even if the reason isn't clear right now.
Okay, so we have the theology of glory, the complex picture of what people believe and how they cope statistically. Now, this is where we bring it all together, right?
Yes.
Our sources offer these really powerful biblical narratives that seem to directly link suffering not just as a problem, but as a context, a place where God's glory is actually revealed or displayed.
Exactly. It's a radical shift in perspective.
It really is.
These texts, they offer a theological response, you could say, to the problem of evil. They don't necessarily explain it away, but they reframe suffering within this much larger narrative of God's sovereign plan and his ultimate glory. They challenge us to look beyond the immediate pain.
Let's dive into one, a very direct example you mentioned earlier,
Right.
the man born blind in John chapter 9. The question of suffering is put right to Jesus there.
It is. John 9, verses 1 to 5. Jesus and his disciples encounter this man blind from birth. And the disciples immediately ask the question that probably springs to many minds. Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?
The blame question again.
Yeah.
Suffering equals sin.
Right, that very common ingrained assumption. But Jesus' answer just turns it on its head. He says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. But this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him.
So that the works of God might be displayed.
It's a profound reframing. The suffering isn't presented as a punishment. Instead, it becomes the stage, the canvas, if you will, for God's action, a means through which his glory, his power, his compassion is revealed in a unique way that maybe couldn't have happened otherwise.
That is such a powerful reframing. Okay, then we have the book of Job. Immense personal suffering leading to this divine confrontation. How does that speak to glory and suffering?
Job is just monumental in wrestling with this. After Job loses everything, endures so much, God finally speaks to him, but not with easy answers. He speaks out of the storm, as the text says.
Out of the storm.
Yeah, and he challenges Job's very limited human understanding. Job 38, God asks, who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge?
Basically saying, who are you to question me?
In a way, yes. It's a confrontation with Job's attempts and maybe our attempts to fully grasp divine justice on human terms. And ultimately, Job's response in chapter 42 is one of humility. He says, surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know.
Acknowledging the limits.
Exactly. It highlights the mystery of God's ways, the limits of our comprehension. And in that very mystery, that sovereignty that we can't fully grasp, God's glory is shown, his unsearchable wisdom, his plan, even when it's painful and confusing for us.
Okay.
Oh.
And one more, which feels so relatable for anyone struggling with injustice. The prophet Habakkuk. He complains directly to God, doesn't he?
He does. Habakkuk is this incredibly raw, honest dialogue. In chapter 1, the prophet just pours out his heart. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save?
He's basically saying, God, why aren't you doing something about all this mess?
Pretty much. He's questioning God's apparent tolerance of injustice, of wrongdoing, and God's first answer is, frankly, shocking. He reveals he's raising up the Babylonians described as ruthless and impetuous to execute judgment.
Wait, he's using a worse nation to judge his own people?
That's exactly Habakkuk's follow-up complaint. He struggles with God using an even more wicked nation, but God's second answer assures him that justice will ultimately prevail, even if it seems slow. He tells Habakkuk to wait for it, that the righteous person will live by his faithfulness.
So hold on, trust.
Right. And importantly, God then pronounces these powerful woes against the wicked Babylonians, detailing their own eventual judgment. It gives this full picture that God uses nations, but those nations are also held accountable.
Okay, so there's this whole arc of complaint, God's surprising action, the struggle with that action, and then the promise of eventual full justice. Where does it all lead? What's the final word in this section?
It culminates in this incredible declaration in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 14.
Okay.
For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea.
Wow. Filled with the knowledge of his glory.
Yes, it connects the whole painful process. The suffering, the complaint, the divine action, the waiting, the eventual justice. It connects it all to the ultimate future revelation of God's glory covering the entire earth.
So even the dark times are somehow part of that unfolding.
That's the radical insight the text offers, that God uses even these incredibly difficult, unjust periods to ultimately unveil his character, his sovereign plan, on this grand global scale. And it reinforces God's ultimate sovereignty right at the end of chapter 2. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him.
What a journey we've taken today. Seriously, from defining God's glory, its weight, and how it's displayed, to looking at the sometimes messy, sometimes contradictory statistics about what people actually believe about God, purpose, and suffering.
Right, the gap there.
And then landing on these powerful biblical stories that directly link suffering, incredibly, to a larger display of divine purpose and glory.
Indeed. And I think the core takeaway here, it isn't that God's glory is some neat, simple intellectual answer that makes suffering disappear or feel okay. It's not that.
No.
Instead, it's a profound theological framework. It invites us, maybe challenges us, to view difficult circumstances differently, not just as random problems or isolated tragedies, but as potential stages. Potential stages for God's actions, his ultimate self-revelation, his glory. And that perspective, as we saw in the psychological data, can deeply impact how people find meaning, how they cope, how they understand their place in a world that holds both immense pain and profound purpose.
So thinking about the listener, what does this all mean for you as you navigate your own life, the suffering you see or experience?
Well, maybe consider this. How readily do we jump to seeking immediate explanations or assigning blame, whether it's to ourselves, others, circumstances, even God, when suffering hits?
It's almost automatic, isn't it?
It often is. So what might shift in your perspective if you started to maybe embrace a framework where suffering itself could be a canvas for a larger, ultimate display of meaning and purpose? Even if, and this is key, even if it's way beyond our full understanding right now. What if you started looking, not necessarily for easy answers, but for the works of God to be displayed as Jesus plans, even in the toughest, most confusing, most painful circumstances of life? Something to think about.